I wanted to preserve my hunting movie that I titled No Land for the Timid, especially for my wife Ruth and my 2 daughters, along with my grandsons and granddaughters. So I come down to Madison, and I'm going to put the voice on today, and I hope that you folks like it, and as my daughter Connie and Judy do. Connie, I might add, is my young daughter, and Judy is my old daughter. I think that Judy probably will charge for everybody for seeing this movie when I give her a copy of it. So keep a sharp eye, and we'll now bring you up to the hunting fields of Alaska. As Robert Service once said in his poem about Alaska, "There's the land. Have you seen it? It's the cussedest land that I know, from the big dizzy mountains that screen it to the deep, death-like valleys below. Some say God was tired when he made it. Some say it's a fine land to shun. Maybe. But there's some that would trade it for no land on earth, and I'm one." I'm going back for the 35th time, back into a land that always brings memories of some of the finest and most thrilling hunts that any guy could ask for. And although I had never been on St. Lawrence Island, the dream of someday paying a visit to this little forsaken island out there in the Bering Sea suddenly had become a reality. Actually, it all started out in early March when I received a letter from the Bureau of Indian Affairs from Nome, Alaska. And their letter requested my help in a program that was designed to teach the Eskimos how to kill and retrieve walruses with a bow and arrow. On previous trips into the North Country, I'd heard of the struggle that the Eskimos were having and how in their hunt for the walrus, the human mortality rate in hunting parties often reached 20%. Also, how the Eskimos, equipped with high-powered rifles, would sometimes slaughter as high as 15 or 20 or even 40 or 50 of these big fellows and have every single one of them sink to the bottom. And because I happen to be a guy like most all other sportsmen, a man who sincerely hates to see the needless slaughter of any animal, I immediately accepted their invitation. The challenge of killing and retrieving a ton of dead-weight walrus presented some problems even with today's accurate and powerful bows and arrows. And part of this challenge was answered by the design of this new harpoon broadhead. The final result was a 2100 grain weapon to be fastened to a 200-pound test nylon line. Now, would this arrow, accurately placed, have enough penetrating power to kill a 3,000-pound bull walrus? And if it could, would the 200-pound test line be big or strong enough to lift the dead weight to the surface? These unanswered questions were foremost in my mind as we neared the famed Chugach mountain range. And as we flew over the tops of these shallow mountains, my thoughts immediately returned to past hunting trips. And right now, fellows, I'd like to bring you back with me to the year of 1958, when we landed in this big valley on a hunt for Dall sheep and any other big game animals that we could get a crack at. On this afternoon, we'll land on a dried-up gravel bar along one of the many unnamed rivers. Pilot guides up north always make use of these landing strips to set hunters down close to game, way back in the boondocks, because they know and realize that the game is becoming quite scarce along the highways, so they always rely on the light airplane to reach virgin hunting country. And with wind conditions just right, they can sometimes put these little super cubs down in less than 75 feet, have a large tire, and a lot of braking power. It is not difficult to hunt the Dall sheep, as a few of the hunters make it sound, because they do not feed way up into the tops of those icy snow-capped peaks. There's no food up there for them in the first place. So it's actually not too much of a problem that one can hoof it through country like that and get to an animal of this type. The average Dall ram will weigh from 150 to 200 pounds, and one with more than a full curl to his horns is considered the valuable trophy, and one with only a bare full curl is just ordinary game. A full curl ram is when the tip of his horn comes around and meets the center of his eye. But one thing that all sportsmen will agree on is when a little Schaefer like that grows up, that his flesh will be the tastiest of all wild game meat. And one afternoon we came across 5 3/4 curl. Now these were just barely legal rams. We had passed up some larger ones, so at the end of the hunt we had to try for a lesser one. Now keep an eye on the one fifth from the left as he hops into view, because he's the biggest of the band, and naturally the sights will be set on him. Now if you keep a sharp eye, you will see puffs of dust fly into the air, and that'll mark the spot where the bullets of the hunter strike the ground. But you will then be able to determine whether he's shot in front of him, and in that case directly behind him. So then they shift her into high gear and head up into the mountaintops. But soon, though, he will be completely hemmed in by gunfire. A few more scattered puffs over the top of his back, and they miss him completely. He got away slicker than a cat's whisker. The brown bear inhabit the coastal areas of Alaska, and they spend most of their time catching these spawning salmon. This is the dog salmon, or chum salmon, averaging about 10 pounds each. I'm always amazed to see the actions of the 2 front feet of any bear, whether it's a black, brown, polar, or grizzly, because they can pick 'em up, set 'em down nice and dainty-like. Ptarmigan always turn white for the winter months, and always you'll find these little parka squirrels in abundance. The natives use their little skins in the making of jackets and they call those parkies. And to me, especially the big bull moose, always show an image of power and brute force, and their meat is a staple of the native diet. Cow moose are, well, basically shy animals and usually prefer the solitude of the spruce trees and the brushy areas rather than the open country. And the battle for life in any country is always a vicious one. And after having its hind leg trapped between those two saplings, that young calf moose starved to death. That's a tough way to go. And takeoffs in this country will make most people swallow once, or even maybe more than that. But when they want to get these little babies airborne in a hurry, they'll put a popple pole out in front on the runway, about 100 yards away. Then when they hit that pole, they will then just bounce these little super cubs right off the ground into the air. But when you fly with the famous Alaskan bush pilots, the natives up there will tell you not to worry, and they'll also tell you that only the good bush pilots are left. Between the Chugach mountain range here and the interior lies some of the roughest and toughest country I have ever seen. I have flown over this area many times, and every time I do, I get a funny feeling right in the middle of the old belly. And it doesn't help matters in the least when you look out the window and then hear the captain announce that you have just lost an engine. But there are no roads here or signs of life for as far as the eye can see. And this is a 7-hour or a 700-mile flight with a small airplane. And I don't think it possible for any man to be ever able to hoof it out of here if he were to be unfortunate and to be forced down into an area such as this. Annually, Rainy Pass here claims the lives of from 20 to 25 hunters or guides. This stretch, I believe, is truly no land for the timid. In the background, we all know is the highest point on the North American continent, and that giant stretches up over 20,000 feet into the air and is called Denali by the natives. But if you were to hunt any of these large and fertile valleys near Mount McKinley, you will find that they are home to 35 species of animals and over 100 varieties of birds. And if you were to hunt in any of these nearby valleys, you would most have come across part of the Nalchina caribou herd. The Nalchina herd is a very, very famous one because it produces most of the world record heads. It is estimated by game men to exceed 100,000 in numbers, although there are over 2 million caribou in the state of Alaska, and any good guide or outfitter up there will guarantee to show you in a 10-day hunt between 8,000 and 10,000 head of these beautiful animals, called the nomads of the north, as they always keep wandering along in search of new feeding grounds. And because the hunters and predators are taking only 10% of the annual increase, therefore they have removed the bounty on the wolves in this area, hoping that that will keep this herd in check. And always make certain to tell the little boys and girls who see this movie that both the male and the female sport a set of antlers, the male antlers being at least 6 or 7 times larger than those of the female. And one afternoon we didn't disturb this little bull. We just watched him as he lay there quietly chewing away at his cud. A moose is a member of the ruminant family, the same as the white-tailed deer of America. The grizzly bear inhabit the interior of Alaska, and these are the same type of bears that have taken the lives of 177 men since Alaska has become statehood. They have somewhat of an ornery disposition, you might say, but believe me, folks, they cannot compare to the viciousness of a polar bear. And one afternoon I didn't disturb these little cubs. These friendly little brown bears were just having a little wrestling match, but I doubt right now whether they would weigh much over 175 pounds. But if they live to be a wise old bear, they may attain a weight 1,600 pounds, although at birth they only weigh 6 to 8 ounces. A lot of folks are under the impression that the brown bear flipped these salmon onto the banks with their paws or claws. They pounce on the salmon and they hold it down underneath the water with their 2 front feet, pick it up with their mouths, and with their teeth just bite them and kill them. And this big bruiser is rated a 10-foot bear. He'd weigh well over 1,000 pounds. He always reminded me of my mother-in-law. But it's not uncommon to see these bears pick up and kill 100 salmon with their teeth and then drop them into the water. And then as they drift downstream, they are usually found and polished off by the ravens and seagulls in real short order. The cunning and vicious wolverine is called the scavenger of the north. Very difficult to outwit and especially to trap. So nowadays, and at that time I should say, it was legal, were usually hunted from air to ground with the hunters using shotguns using 00 buckshot. They're a small scavenger, not weighing much over 40 pounds or so, but their fur is so valuable to the Eskimos because they use it as the trim around the hoods of their parkies because it never frosts over. The big timber wolves up there are hunted in the same way, from air to ground. This one is already badly hit through both kidneys, and he soon fell to the top of the snow. But sometimes the big coal black ones that you kill up there will weigh over 200 pounds. And in 1 week's hunting, Denny Thompson and I killed 81 head of these critters. We collected a $50 bounty on each pair of ears that we turned in, and the hides also brought us $75 apiece. And the timber wolves can really take and kill a lot of moose and caribou, especially during the deep snows of Old Man Winter. And talking about moose, men, the one on the right's about a 65-incher, the one on the left about 7 inches, and that one in the middle is a good 75-inch bull. On this afternoon, just at sunset, I was hunting out on the Alaskan Peninsula with a couple from San Francisco. And once you jump a moose up out of its bed, like the fourth bull will presently do, they'll always seem to stop and present a perfect target before finally deciding to head for safety. And had Big John Cheney so decided to have pulled the hook on this rifle, he sure could have flattened that fourth one or taken any of the other three as far as that goes. But we'll pass these all up and let them go on their way. We all know the fun is not in just the killing. But we don't pass up this one. Roy Ann became a little excited, and she ran back and forth a couple of times and didn't get the shot off when he was standing out there, not over 40 yards away. So when he swings to the left, you will notice at the base of the neck and the base of the shoulders, a puff of hair fly into the air, and that will mark her first hit. Now when he stops, you will again see a smaller puff of hair fly at about the same spot, and that put him down. And the next thing I remembered seeing was his antlers showing just over the top of her head. And when the moose jumped to its feet, she wasn't quite ready to fire, so then Big John helped her out with his big elephant gun, and of course that slowed him down. I'll never forget this hunting day, fellows, a perfect hunting day. Big fog bank rolling in, and those 4 moose still are the 4 largest moose that I have ever seen traveling together. And this one here still is the largest moose that I have ever seen taken. He was, in fact, the 1961 world record moose. I couldn't help but marvel at the hoarfrost that completely encased his antlers and extended down his backbone. You'll see him lurch, and that's when he got hit straight through the center of the heart with a 30-06 Sug. He gets another one now 3 inches from that same spot, causing him to buckle slightly. But now when he stops, there are no more shots necessary to put him down because he's actually dead on his feet, and he'll slowly topple to the frozen ground. So that's the end of the road for that old boy. And once after seeing this scene, a lady to me in Pittsburgh came up and said, "Art LaHa, you're a cruel man." And I said, "Well, ma'am, to me, it wouldn't make any difference if you were to take an animal's life of that type with a rifle, a shotgun, or bow and arrow, or to kill it with an atomic bomb." I said, "I know that you'll find, missus, that all hunters will readily admit that hunting is definitely cruel. But rest assured," I told her, "as long as there's one man living and one animal living, one will be hunting the other." And you fellows have already noticed he wouldn't even make a good gun rack because the butt of the gun didn't come much past the center of his ears. Had an 82.5-inch spread, and he would weigh right around a ton. And from here on in, all you moose hunters know that the work really begins because one must lug all of the meat from the field. If you fail to do so, you'll be arrested and charged for wanton waste by Alaskan state game laws. Over 10% of the state of Alaska is covered with glaciers, and that's where you hunt for the blue glacier bear. Now, when he got clipped there, you'll see what happens. He's violating the speed limits right now, hitting those rocks, but traveling so fast that he went up the incline on the other side. But now when he settles back to this position, you might say he's now feeling no pain. When one hunts for the blue glacier bear, it's always a lot easier coming down than going up after him. And in most cases, it's just a good thing to use what the good Lord give you. Come down the easy way. The blue glacier bear will look somewhat like the black bear that you find in Wisconsin and Michigan. However, they have a very woolly underfur and a definite bluish sheen or cast to the fur itself. Small bear, not weighing much over 400 pounds. Very coveted trophy, though, because he's found only on the St. Elias mountain range. Now, in a 2-month span of moose hunting that we do up there, we'll pass up hundreds and hundreds of these little young bulls. These bulls are called mulligan moose by the natives. They're only about 1.5 years old, and that's the type that they take for table use. They never pass up one of those. Now, ladies, this is what all hunters hope and pray for, a fast, quick, clean kill. And you'll see the hair part directly in back of the shoulders on a perfect shot, fast and clean. Notice also that his buddy, possibly for the first time in his life, had ever heard the crash of gunfire. He slowly walks away without breaking into a run. I think we looked at well over 200 moose before Big John decided on this one that was standing out in front of that big mountain. And possibly we were the first humans that he had ever seen. And right now he walks up and looks straight into the lens of the camera as I was taking this picture. And when he moves off and that big 470 bellows, I don't have to say much at all. Lumberjacks up in my country would call out, "Timber." This one here had 79-inch spread and 48 points. And I sincerely believe that an animal of this type would forever be a world record in northern Ontario, and it would be unheard of in the little country of Newfoundland. At the top of the screen are the racks of 3 stag caribou that were standing together. Roy Ann fired one single shot from her .338 Winchester, broke the neck of one of these stags, put him down right in his tracks. He was by no means anywhere close to being a record, but having a pretty fair set of antlers and wearing a nice white cape around his neck, she was a mighty pleased and tickled gal. There are no 2 sets of caribou antlers ever found alike. Now watch the dust fly from the shoulder of that brown bear that we caught sleeping. Pays to stay awake every once in a while. Now this bear died what you might say on the slow side or the tough side, and right at the time he got to his feet, I ran out of crank on the camera and I managed to rewind and pick him up only after he had rolled dead underneath those tag alders. But this is what is called a 11-foot Alaskan brown bear. He's 11 foot from the tip of his nose to his tail, and he's 11 feet across the 2 outstretched front legs. Rick Cooley of Palatine, Illinois, always wanted to take a moose with a bow and arrow, and she and I stalked up to within, close to 40 yards from a fair-sized bull. Now her first shot will slice through the right flank, completely penetrate through the stomach and into the lungs. And to me, after being hit, a moose seems to quit or give up quicker than a deer. They stop real fast. Her second shot missed, but her third shot was perfect. She hit him tight and low in back of the left foreleg. In fact, after that shot dropped in there, he managed just to cross that little creek there before dropping to the ground. An old bull, we estimated the age at about 14 years, and being well past his prime of life and on the skinny side, he'd only weigh about 1,200 pounds. Now here's that Alaskan brown bear I shot with a single arrow. I hit this baby at 30 yards right in the boiler room. I buried the arrow right to the fletchings or the feathers, and he spun around 2-3 times, and he traveled 165 yards into the willows before dropping to the ground. These are the undigested cranberries that were passed along the way after being hit with the arrow. You might call that knocking the cranberries out of them. The tracks of this bear were 17 inches long, 10 inches wide. Here's another brown bear taken by a Chicago hunter, but many of the 8 shots that Frank Golder fired at this bear missed him because he was getting deflection from hitting these heavy branches. Now the bear started downhill, as you noticed, and took a couple of somersaults, but they still are tough at times. as you will see, and he once again gets himself squared away on all 4 feet. But from this spot, this bear will not be able to move more than 10 feet away, and naturally he'll be leaving quite a heavy blood trail behind. Now he appears to be a small bear, but I want to point out that in this case I'm using the telephoto lens, taking this picture at about 150 yards away. And the next scene of this very same bear will give you folks a little better idea as to their exact size. But this is a good 11-foot bear. And when Frank raised the bear's leg, I noticed the bear's foreleg completely covered up his chest. So I forgot about these hunts on the interior and out on the Alaskan Peninsula as we prepared to set down at the little airstrip in Nome, Alaska. And after we dropped into Nome, we still had a few hours of daylight left, so we decided to take a whirl at ice fishing. There's a handy way to get out there in a hurry. But when one fishes through the ice of the Bering Sea, there's a little work to do before you get to the actual fishing bit, and it's a lot different than ice fishing around the smaller lakes in Wisconsin, because first of all, out here you got to chisel through 10 feet of ice. Most of the fishing is done by the Eskimo ladies, and each of them have their own style of jigging. But jigging all amounts to jerking their little fishing gear up and down so that the fish are attracted to a solid brass hook. It was also a barbless hook. But they have a lot of rhythm to their actions, and I'll say that in 2 or 3 hours' time, they each catch a couple of hundred of these real easy-to-catch tom cods. The tom cods will closely resemble the walleye pike that all the fishermen take from the freshwater lakes in Wisconsin. However, they're a smaller fish, averaging only about 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds each. Now, she'll give each one of them a little headache as soon as they hit the top of the ice. And what she's trying to do here, fellas, is she's trying to bat them off the hook with her little fishing reel, as she calls it, so that it's not necessary for her to get her hands wet. The Eskimo knows how to stay warm at all times. In fact, they just don't believe in letting themselves get cold in the first place. After a while, she let me use her fishing reel, and I caught quite a few of them. And then I called her back, and I said, "Come on back here, kiddo." I said, "I want to show you an old Indian trick that I learned on the Lac du Flambeau Indian Reservation. And this is a real handy way to get your limit of fish in a hurry. And any of you fellas or you girls want to learn this secret, well, you just write me a letter, and I'll drop you a card and tell you how I do that." They also catch the larger sheefish, but they would rather fish for the small scorpions. And to me, the scorpion surely was not a very appetizing-looking dish. It looked nothing more than a bunch of bones and fins. But they told me they really relished this little job, so I took it off the hook and I flipped it over to one of the elderly Eskimos, and he demonstrated to me how they clean fish, Eskimo style. And while the fish is still alive, he'll just pick it up and then open his mouth. Then he will press the contents of the stomach and the intestines out through the opened mouth on top of the ice. And ladies, when this operation was over and he tapped his nose on the ice, he told me that it was then ready for the pan, that they lightly boil it, and all of it is consumed, bones, fins, and all. I'll never forget this hunting day. Pretty cold when it was 65 below zero. We got this airplane started up and busted it loose from the frozen ice, and I wanted to go over and say hello to John Nelson. I met John Nelson when I polar bear hunted up out of Kotzebue many years ago, before this, I should say, and he was the only self-sustaining Eskimo that I ever met. He and his family live out here, and that's way out north of in the Arctic Ocean. They live out here all by themselves, and they make their living right from the land. So I brought John a little medicine along, and I know that this here bottle would last him for at least a year. He would just take it if he had a cold or something. But I wanted to go out there and say hello to him, and also to go fishing with him and watch how they would do the catching of the she-fish. And I asked John if he thought we'd catch any she-fish, and he said, well, I'll bet my life on it. And I said, well, that's pretty good for me. But this will give you an idea how they store their frozen fish for their tables and also for the dogs. And he made his home from the stunted trees and from the driftwood, and the refrigeration system is right up on top of the roof. They throw dead caribou up there, moose meat. That's a young calf caribou right there. So I'm not going to say much about this here. I'm just going to watch this picture and make excuses for it, the red flashes that you're seeing on the side. But this was in a fire, this film, and that will forever remain there. But I had to keep this because there was no way I was going to get another picture, another set of pictures like this, I should say. They catch these she-fish, they call them, and they look like a giant smelt, and they're very tasty. They taste just like a walleye pike. They take in the fall of the year, when it's early, they drive 2 stakes in the ground about 100 yards apart, and then they thread a rope through there and a net. And then when they want to catch the fish, they drop the net into the water by digging a post out. And I'm just gonna let you see that today. You notice my hair there is all frosty. It was between 60 and 65 below zero on this day. It's really something. Just sit and look at this picture. How these guys have got it figured out. Just think, in a matter of an hour's time, they got enough fish for their tables to last them a good year. So that's really something. I can't say enough good about John Nelson. That's his Eskimo name, by the way. One of the best days I've ever had spending with that gentleman right there. They make each dog pull 500 pounds of weight per animal. And not everybody fishes, though, up there. Kids, I guess, will be kids wherever you go. The frozen Bering Sea is just another playground for these little Babe Ruths of the North. And like children everywhere, they're a little shy at first, but are so easy to get acquainted with. These children are never struck or spanked by their parents. I said goodbye to this cute little black-eyed girl. Then we continued on the 200-mile flight across the Bering Sea to St. Lawrence Island. And as we flew over those open cracks that the Eskimos call leads, my thoughts immediately returned to my past polar bear hunts, especially during the years of 60, 61, 62, 63, and 64. And the pictures of those hunts came easily back to my mind's eye. That first bear here was my really first look at a true wild polar bear as he walked through the pressure ridges of the always ever heaving and freezing Arctic Ocean. Now, we knew an animal like that could take you mighty fast. He could slap your head off with one swipe of his paws, that's for sure. And look at those front legs, fellas. That's what you call a real set of pins, huh? And this is what an elephant gun will do to a polar bear when a perfect shot is made at 50 feet away. Pick him up, set him down. Here's another one. And I believe that this bear was hit exactly at the right time. I think that he was actually trying to feint us out of position. I think in another second or so that he would have definitely charged us. But right now, it's time to get the business part over with. And he immediately begins biting at the sore spot. Experts will tell you that if you overshoot your landing and dunk into open water of that type, that you will live for not more than a minute and a half. And there is the stride or the gait of a running polar bear. Watch him make that 12-foot-high leap onto that block of ice with ease. You can only hunt the polar bear during bright, sunshiny weather when the shadows are sharp on the rough ice below. In fact, any guide will tell you up there that that is the first thing you will see is the shadow of the running white bear. If any pilot would try to fly during a cloudy day, if he was not instrument rated, a whiteout condition could possibly cause him to fly straight down into the ice and be wrecked. And if that happened, he just bought to camp. And that there was a Jim Dandy of a bear, folks. That bear there was my prize polar bear kill scene. This one here weighed over 1,300 pounds, and he'll be taken at a distance of 28 feet off the end of the gun barrel. Now, watch in the left-hand corner of the screen, you'll see the jar on Thompson's shoulder caused from the recoil of his big .375 Magnum when he hit that bear squarely through the center of the heart, knocking the bear over backwards and into that open lead. And had he died there, folks, he would have sunk like a stone, but he pulled himself from the lead, and I watched the water fly as he got hit tight and low in back of the left foreleg. And that shot put him down. However, there was one more shot necessary to forever keep him right there. Thompson turned around and looked at me. You could see he was a little relieved as I was taking the pictures, and believe me, so was I. A polar bear hunt's a real great hunt, and it's so different from a turkey hunt or a deer hunt, and I hope that any of you fellas who want to go up there and get one of these bears someday get the chance to do so. And I sincerely believe that even if you were to go up there and fail in getting one of these big ice bear, that you still would leave that country with a good taste in your mouth. I think for one, just to go up there and take a good long look at that big, vast, frozen Arctic Ocean and a visit with the friendly natives is really worth the price of the trip up there. Now notice the gait or stride of polar bear as they come in your direction. Now their gait is so different from that of a black or a brown bear. Their head swings from side to side. One is reminded of a huge snake. And these were the only two polar bears that I ever saw spook when they became aware of us. Usually they'll spook right at you because they're noted for their short temper, fast charge. Anything they see move out there on the ice, they think it's a free meal. You'll easily recognize when he first got hit right there. You'll definitely recognize when he got hit the second time. Now, many times, folks, I was tempted to end this scene right here and take it out. Then I said to myself, no, sirree, I'm going to leave it in, because I believe that the people who see my hunting movie are entitled to know the truth about polar bear hunting. I also believe that this could easily happen to any of you who are watching this right now if you were to go up and try for one of these big bear. I don't know where they get their extra charge of energy from, but sometimes, believe me, it doesn't seem humanly possible to knock them off their 4 feet. Now the hunter, Chef Alberto, he's shooting fast and he's shooting true, but he's not shooting true enough. Maybe he's trying too hard. The bear, of course, is letting out a little racket and blowing some steam around. But anyway, those 14 holes that you see up and down that bear's body, fellas, are .375 Magnum bullet holes. They're one tough bear. If I ever take one of those all the way with a bow and arrow, I'll consider myself one of the luckiest guys that ever lived. Now, ladies, this has happened many times to the deer hunters of Wisconsin. Anytime your husband only breaks the back of any animal that he hits, he's only going to paralyze him, and he's going to have to dispatch him with another shot. He gets that now directly right in back of the right ear. You can see the blood spill, but that's still not enough. This baby can get up and go. Now, the red blood on a polar bear hide is more pronounced than an equal amount of blood on a black or a brown bear hide. But now watch here. He'll get busted again for the final time. But I hope that you folks will join with me and say this, that one must rate the polar bear as being the most dangerous game animal on the North American continent. They're number one in my book, and that's for sure. So I forgot about those polar bear hunts and the other hunts on the interior as we prepared to set down at the little airstrip in the little town of Gamble, which is located on the northwestern side of St. Lawrence Island, 33 miles away from Russia. And after landing, I was surprised to see the little girls running around in their red stretch pants and to see the older women standing in their bright-colored cloth parkies. I expected to see all furs. I first met Art Patterson, who was in charge of Indian affairs, and then the next man I was to meet was the chief of the tribe, who incidentally has named himself Abraham Lincoln. So I presented Mr. Lincoln's boy with a bow and arrow set, and then they helped us carry all our gear over to the Solomon Boshu home. And this home was to be our base for the duration of the hunt. That's my photographer and myself. We had cots up there in the attic. And our next door neighbor turned out to be a very famous lady. Her name is Florence Malatowoc. And when she was only 5 years old, her father gave her a chunk of sealskin along with a piece of charcoal, and he told her, "You draw." And these placemats are typical of the work that has made her and her relatives famous. Florence was originally from King Island, which is another little windswept island out there in the Bering Sea. But King Island is very famous for its ivory carvers. And that, as we compared the power of the two bows, I could see why they were losing quite a few of their hunters. Their bows were made from muskox and sinew. As we compared the power of the two blows, I could see why they're losing quite a few of their hunters. Florence, as I mentioned before, was from King Island, and that was very famous for its ivory carvers, and she demonstrated to me her skill in carving. And in about 2.5 hours' time, she fashioned a little pair of white Arctic foxes into a set of earrings, and then a little larger fox into a necklace. And she said, "Now you be sure and bring these back home to your wife." And on the way back to the Boshu home, I met this elderly lady, and she told me those tattoos were meant to keep away evil spirits, and that she did that by poking soot through the skin with a needle. I untied the little sled dog when I got back to the house. They teach these dogs to pull at an early age. When they're only 6 weeks old, they stake them out on top of the ice and snow, so they're everlasting lunging up against their collars trying to get away. They said that's how they taught them to pull. And the adult sled dog is not an ornery cuss, as many people believe. These dogs are trained to give their all. There has to be a bond of friendship between man and dog in this frozen country if both are to survive, because other than their skin boats, they're their only means of transportation. Next morning, I asked young Eric Boshu what these men were doing, and he said, "Well, Art," he said, "they're too old to go hunting, and that's what they do to earn their share of the meat. They'll lay up there on those rooftops," he said, "for 14, 16 hours a day, their eyes ever scanning the surface of the water out in front, watching for any types of wildlife. And if they happen to see a school of seals swim by or some walruses float by on the larger icebergs, they will then immediately get in touch with the younger hunters at sea with walkie-talkies, and they will then direct them to where the game or the promising area is at. They're fine old gentlemen, but they just can't hack it anymore at sea." 2 weeks before I arrived in Gamble, the men of the village had pooled their money and had purchased one of the newest harpoon guns. Now, the bomb itself has fins on the rear section, just like the feathers on a regular hunting arrow. However, like a rifle, it does have a cap that is sensitive to impact, which will in turn ignite a fuse. And then after a 3-second delay, that fuse will explode a charge of black powder. The gun itself is a 40-pound solid brass weapon. The bomb is about 18-20 inches long. And after this bomb is put together and inserted in the barrel toward the breech, it will then leave the end of that barrel with the force of an 8-gauge shotgun and will have enough penetrating power to go at least 6 or 8 feet into a whale's belly. And this will be the first time that they take this weapon on a hunt for blue whale. And the blue whale, we all know, is the largest creature of the sea. And believe me, I was tickled pink just to be asked to accompany the younger men on my first whale hunt. There's a good shot of Russia in the background, folks. Now, these men, mind you, have not bagged a whale for 5 years, yet every day during the whaling season, from the first part of April through the first part of July, they're out there trying to get one, weather permitting. 5 years before I'd hunted with them, they had bagged a whale, but they lost him out there because they were caught out there in a big storm and they had to leave it behind. And they were still feeling sorry about that incident when I was later on hunting with them. Each of these boats will also carry along a square 2-foot blue flag. And when a whale comes up to blow, it'll spout steam and water about 40 feet high. And when any hunter notices this, he will immediately raise his little flag to the top of the mast. And then when his high-flying flag is spotted by any of the other men or the other boats, they all immediately converge in on the area, hoping so that when the whale hits the top of the water, that they'll be able to sail right up to him, always approaching the whale from the rear section. And this, the splitting of the walrus eyes is left up for the women to do. They split it right down the middle. And I was also to learn that they made their walrus hide rope taken only from the female walrus. That the bull walruses are great lovers and never struck the female with their tusk. Therefore, there's no scar tissue in the hide of a female walrus that would make for a weak point in the rope. Now, there will be about, I would say 25 or 30 boats in action on this day, and about 150 men will be taking part in this whale hunt. These boats are called umiaks by the Eskimo. They're 25 to 30 feet long and easily accommodate from 6 to 8 guys. Now, as we were sailing here, the Eskimos pointed out, they said this is what they call low ice. Sometimes, though, it juts up there 75 or 80 feet high. And this is how they told me the blanket toss originated years ago. As we passed this mukluk here, that's a large seal that would weigh up to 600 pounds. And believe me, he got away just in the nick of time. And now, if they didn't have high peaks of ice available, they told me that that's how the blanket toss originated years ago. They would just then gather around their hunter on this type of low ice, and they'd flip him straight up in the air from a stretched walrus hide, about 20 to 30 feet up there. And on the way up and down, he was supposed to look around and see if he couldn't spot anything. They told me that, and I believe them. After we pulled in alongside of their boat there, we noticed the baby mukluk they had shot was still squirming a bit. They had also shot and killed its mother. Sex makes no difference to these great hunters out there, folks, because they'll shoot anything that they see. And you really can't blame them, though, because hunting is their business. After all, the corner supermarket is a long, long ways to the village of Gamble. But this critter is quickly caped and butchered right on the spot. Now, I took some of this walrus, I took off some of this meat here from this critter, and I put it in a frying pan and fried it like you would fry bacon, and it tasted like the first dose of cod liver oil that my mother made me take. Now, all of these boats had motors mounted in the well near the center of the boat, and they just toured around, all looking for signs of whale. Now, I had a deal cooking with one of the guys in my boat. Young Eric could talk English pretty good, and I said, now look at Eric, if we happen to get into a bunch of seals or walruses or even a small beluga white whale, they only weigh about 1,000 pounds or so, I said, how about giving me first shot at them with my harpoon broadhead? He said, sure thing, Art, we'll give you first shot at all the game we see. But you'll see they quickly forget their promises to cooperate, and in most cases, as you'll be noticing, they'll be beating me to the shot. I don't think they do this intentionally, though, folks. I think that once they spot any types of wildlife on these waters, they just never want it to get away from them. But I have to say that without a doubt, at times, they were the most excitable men that I have ever hunted with. And at times they did remind me of a bunch of coyotes closing in on a fawn kill. As we were sailing here, I was the first one to spot this little seal, and I knew that as soon as he spotted me, he would immediately duck below the surface of the water. So I waited for him to make his dive before I reached for the bow. And I got the arrow on the string in short order, and I was practically at full draw here In another split second, I could have loosed the arrow, but right now you see Eric got a little excited and he plugged him. But unless you hit the seal perfectly, it will sink to the bottom. Even if it so much as gets one bite full of water down into its lungs, it'll go there anyway. But in this case, the shot from the moving boat was perfect. He hit him right between the blinkers. Now the wind whipped us around a couple of times, but soon we were able to get close enough so that I could snag a meat hook in his head and haul it aboard. Now I know that all of the ladies that see this movie are well aware of the value of the famous Alaskan fur seal, but the hide or the pelt belongs to the man who pulled the trigger. And to the lucky shooter, this hide, after being dried, will bring him from $50 to $75 each. And during the migration of the seals, they literally shoot these little rascals by the thousands. Many times I saw them shove their rifle barrels right down into the salt water before they could continue to fire. They had to cool them off. Now, after we placed the seal across the gunwale of the boat in a position to drain the blood overboard, young Bob heard over the walkie-talkie systems that one of the hunters had sighted a whale about a mile and 3/4 away from us. And right then and there, Eskimo chatter in our boat began to flow thick and fast. And I'll say that within 90 seconds or a minute, they had the sail boomed down and they had the motor going wide open towards the siding. However, in typical Alaskan behavior, what was open water 10 or 15 minutes before now was practically a solid sea of ice. This is caused by the ever-shifting ice packs, the shifting winds, the tides, and the currents, and immediately you'll see the man at the prow of the boat give the signal to turn in. Now, right here and now, he has made up his mind to risk a portage across that ice rather than to waste the time it would take to go all the way around it, which would have been for about a 7-mile run. So it's only a mile and 3/4 across it, so they want to make for better headway. Now, when they hit what they call the rotten ice, they'll use this rocking action with the motor going wide open so that they can ram the boat through the rotten ice to the solid ice. And once you hit the solid ice, well, that's really where the portage will begin. Now, the Eskimos will caution everybody to hold and get a good grip on the side of the boat, and they made it a special point to tell me they knew that I was a greenhorn, who they call a chichaco. They said the Bering Sea was chock full of cracks and crevices, and that these were covered over during the evenings by drifting snow, and that it was hard for anybody to tell where they were at. Now, I don't know if it was the heavy clothing I was wearing, or maybe it was just because I was the heaviest one of the bunch, but I do know this, that I left my fingerprints embedded in the side of that boat forever. I first fell through a 2-inch layer or a 1-inch layer, and when my weight suddenly going down caused the boat to tip on the side, you'll see how quick the Eskimos react to a situation like that. Then I fell through the rest of the way right here, and immediately they jump in there. Eric first and grabbed me by the seat of the pants to haul me aboard, and his buddy right alongside with him. This is an everyday occurrence to these great hunters. They don't think nothing of this. They jump right out to the solid ice, continue right on. But folks, I looked at the holes as we went by. I got in and stayed in it too. And I said to Eric, I said, how deep is it down there? Oh, he said it's over 5,000 feet deep. And I said, boy, oh boy, that sure would have been a lot colder down there than to where I'm more than likely going. And right at this point, the Eskimos became more and more excited as we got one step closer to the whale. Now we'll take a short break and we'll come right on and shortly show you the second reel. As soon as we completed the portage and once again hit the open water, I looked up and could already see a lot of the boats converging in on the killing area. The others had harpooned and killed the whale while we were still making our way across the portage, and I'd given anything to have been in on the actual kill instead of the fourth boat here to arrive on the scene. However, they told me that they caused this whale to belly up after hitting him 5 times with the bomb gun. Now, this whale was 75 feet long, and the estimated weight by the Eskimo at about 60,000 pounds. Now, never in my lifetime have I ever seen a bunch of happier men. They were like children with a new shiny toy. Immediately, they tie the walrus hide ropes to the tail section of the whale in preparation for the long tow back to the mainland. And never have I seen any more excited men. They just like kids with a new toy. And after the striker's boat is served, then they will throw all the rest of the boats a chunk of meat, about 2 foot square. And this raw whale meat is the ice cream or the dessert of the Eskimo diet. And never at any time is it ever cooked. And after the striker's boat is served, the man who first harpooned the whale, all the rest of the boats will get a chunk of about this size.
So we were the next one to be served, the fourth one, I should say. And after all the other...
This is called muck tuck by the Eskimo. They'll take that 1-inch thick hide along with 4 or 5 inches of the fat of the blubber and store it in what they call in 55-gallon wooden barrels. Then as it ages and ferments after 4 to 5 months, it gets what the Eskimo says on the soft side. Actually, there was so much excitement in the air on this day that I was more or less caught up in the gay atmosphere, and I gladly accepted some of their Eskimo delicacy. And this was my first taste of raw whale meat that they call muktuk. And it tasted like muktuk. Now this line of boats will be extended out there about a 1/4 of a mile long, and they'll tie all the boats together for a straight line back to camp. Now right now, folks, these men are not waving at the cameras. They're all yelling and hollering for each other to get lined up for a straight and narrow pull back to the camp. Because right now they know that a storm is in the makings, and they don't want to lose this whale like the one they had lost 3 years before. It's a funny thing when you hunt with these great hunters, that they can be right in the act of skinning a critter, or all of a sudden they'll lift their head and they'll drop whatever they're doing and throw all the gear into the boats and get going. They just have a real uncanny sense for predicting advanced weather. I swear they can smell it. Now, those pokes are made from skinning out a 600-pound spotted seal and inflating the hide with air. And a couple of those pokes will have enough buoyancy to keep a dead whale's head afloat. That white streak underneath the water is the tip of its nose, and I measured from the tip of his nose to the eye, and it was 29.5 feet. The eye was about as big around as a basketball. Now, I was never able to find out how they secured these outboard motors. I don't know if they were grants of the government or whether the Eskimos sold enough Arctic fox pelts or seal skins to buy them themselves. I'll never know, because every time I asked a question, they just didn't bother to answer me. Now, right now, they send a man off to the left, out in front. He is supposed to select a low and level site so that we'll be able to stop and cut off the flukes in a section of the tail that they felt was causing too much of a drag on these waters. They never want to be trapped out on these waters for overnight. Now, they know that we've got 14 miles of slow travel ahead of us, so they want to make for better headway. Now, it takes a big Eskimo to weigh 135 pounds, but by the time we reached the mainland, their little bellies were really popping because they'd eaten somewhere between 300 and 400 pounds of that raw muktuk. Back on the village, on the coastline, the women and children are all gathered at the water's edge, all hoping and praying to God that we'd get this meat supply back to their tables. They had already received the news of the whale kill over the walkie-talkie systems. Now, back on the mainland, the women and children are all gathered at the water's edge. Now, they send a man off to the left, as I mentioned before, and he's supposed to select a low and level site so that we'll be able to stop and and get this work done. Now, this is that big, broad tail fin that lays flat in the water, so different from the vertical tail fin of our muskies. That's the part that they always keep a sharp eye out for. And when they always approach the whale from the rear section, and because that big, broad fin could easily take one of those small canoes right down underneath the water when the whale would make his dive. And although the Eskimo is a small man, he's still a strong man. And I suppose that from the past years of lugging and dragging stuff across the rough ice that he has developed the muscles in his forearms because he's a mighty fine puller. There's the only man that drank whiskey on the island there. He made a still at his home. But they voted their town dry by 14 votes. So there was nobody drinking on the island, that's for sure. But they called him Renegade Joe. But he is a good guy. He sure did his share of the work. And they're not selfish, and they are happy. They sing and chant as they pull and jerk on the ropes. There's no shirking on the part of anybody. Now, the striker didn't even consider keeping a single pound of meat for himself until all of this was divided up amongst his people evenly. Many different types of cutting instruments you'll see them using up there. Any chunk of iron that the Eskimo can get his hands on and he feels that he can hammer it into some type of cutting edge, he quickly does so. There are no bones in the tail section of the blue whale. And these slices that they're cutting off may not look it, folks, but I would say they're about 85 pounds each. Now, just as the Eskimos had it figured, a storm sure was in the makings, and the skies darkened, and at this point the wind increased. And right now I was a little dubious as to whether we were going to be successful in getting this meat back to camp. And to tell the truth about it, folks, I was a little concerned as to just how stout these boats were. I wondered if they would really hold together if the going got more or any rougher. They just tie these hides over a wooden framework. There's no life jackets worn by anyone. They told me the only good a life jacket would be to help in recovering a person's body. They said if we dunked over in waters of that temperature, we'd last about 2 minutes. And as soon as we neared the lee side of the island, the wind calmed down considerably, and every member of the little town there was right down to lend a helping hand. And as soon as we landed off to the left here on the lee side, I wheeled her up to the cabin, and I got myself a hot steaming cup of black coffee. But this will give you an idea how strong that half, 3/4 inch walrus hide rope is. They'll tie these short sections together any length that they need, and it's still strong enough to pull 120,000 pounds of dead weight through the water. And I was also to learn that they make their walrus hide rope taken only from the hide of a female walrus, and the reason for that is they said the bull walruses were great lovers, and they never strike the female with their tusks. Therefore, there is no scar tissue in the hide of a female walrus that would make for a weak point in the rope. Now, knowing there wouldn't be time to butcher up the whale before the storm struck or closed in, all that they're concerned with is to anchor the whale to the big chunks of ice nearby, so that the winds and tides couldn't pull it back to sea. And the older men immediately busy themselves by pulling all the boats and storing all the gear underneath the top of the boats up on top of the hill. They put these boats on top of some whale ribs. You see those sticking up there in the background, because if they don't get them off the ground, the dogs get hungry once in a while, and they chew holes in them. And just as they had it figured, a storm sure was in the makings. The skies darkened and the wind increased, and these dogs, well, you can almost tell the extent of the blizzard by the way the dogs burrow into the snow to keep warm. The deeper they dig, the longer and more wicked the storm. But I don't think it got much over 20 or 25 below this evening, and not over 2 feet of snow really fell to the top of the ground. And as you've already noticed, the dogs are just standing or lying up on top of the snow with their backs to the wind. But the wind did gust at, I'd say 40 knots at times. And I was surprised to see the search for food continuing at a time like this. in these high winds, this little snow bunting there trying to scratch up a free meal somewhere along the way. And here's where nature will pull a reverse. Sometimes if they have lean pickings on their hunts, they won't have their dog food for 3 weeks or so. But the dogs always seem to be on the hungry side to me. They were always chasing these birds around. And the first pass this dog made at the bird, he missed him, but the bird made a mistake, and he tried to fly into that strong wind, and that slowed him down. So right now he made a short burst there, and he had a midnight snack for that pooch. The older men bring in the seal oil for the lamps in the stove. There's no electricity on St. Lawrence Island, and it also contains not a single tree. It's just a rock out there, 130 miles long and 20 to 30 miles wide. They do have a Christmas tree, though, and that was left there by the soldiers after they abandoned the army post. And the soldiers had fashioned it out of wrought iron. So the natives tore down the army post and used the lumber to make these little buildings. But the wind howled all that night along with the 750 dogs. It was quite a sound. But I was as warm and comfortable in the home of Solomon Boshu as I have ever been in any motel or hotel I've ever stayed at. I had a cot up in the attic, as I mentioned before, and I had a sleeping bag that was made by the Eskimos. It was a little on the smelly side, but it was real warm. Next morning we went up the bathroom door, and we noticed that the wind had drifted the snow nearly to the eaves in some places. Then we walked over by the old abandoned Army Quonset hut. This serves as their local post office right today. And naturally, I didn't blame the postmaster for not being on hand. I sure knew he didn't have a chance to dig himself in. And then I walked past a lot of these pretty-looking snowdrifts on the way down to the edge of the sea. I wanted to get down there and take a look and see how they were getting along with the butchering of the whale, and I got down there just in time to see them pulling off these big chunks of meat. Now, years ago, when they killed a whale, they had to cut him up at sea, and that process took days and days to complete, sometimes even weeks. So you might want to say that no matter how they secured these outboard motors, they sure are a blessing to these good people, especially at a time like this, because they're at least able to drag this big body into the shoreline, and then with the help of every member of the village, they butchered this whale up in about 14 hours' time. There's no shirking on the part of anybody. It doesn't take that many men to pull a little chunk of meat like that. Now, this is really something. It's a real pity. They salvage only this 5 or 6 inch outer layer completely around this mammal's body. And this is sad, folks, because if they were able to save this meat and if they had a strong motor of some sort, so they could jack this big hulk up on top of the ice and remove the entrails, they would therefore save tons and tons of meat. But they don't have anything that they can get it up there with, so I'm going to repeat myself. They lose 95% of that whale, salvaging only the outer layer. And that's a shame. I took a double-bitted axe and I chopped down through that blubber. It was about 2 foot thick, and I hit the red meat, and it was real nice looking, and I chopped it up like one would make hamburger patties, and I fried it, and it tasted just like baby beef to me. Went down real easy. So it's too bad, but they don't. Many different types of foot gear you'll see them using up there, but during the cold, severe winter months, they'll use their own foot gear. They call those mucklucks, and they take the scraping off the wheel teeth for their inner sole. It's the warmest thing I've ever had on my feet. I brought a pair of them back home, but they were Eskimo tan, so I made a mistake, put them in my wife's bedroom, and she threw them in the fireplace. I watched with a lot of interest here. They punched a big hole through the body cavity right at the water's edge, or the water line, I should say. Now, what they wanted to do was to let the gas escape so that the inrushing water would upset the ballast of the whale and cause it to tip over. And you can see how foxy they are. It did exactly that. That's a cutie, isn't it? That exposed the tender underside of the whale. And they made a series of these holes until they were able to roll it completely around. Now there's the striker, the man with the glasses, 64 years old, and his 4th whale kill in his lifetime. In most cases, the older men will wear the sealskin jackets and hats. The younger guys lean to the government surplus clothing. And they'll put in these meat hooks and exert opposite pressure as they make it a little easier for the guys handling the pikes or the chisels. Now already with the use of ptarmigan telegram, as they call it, there are young hunters coming from as far away as Northeast Cape. That's way in the other end of the island. And they're coming to get a piece of meat about 2 foot square. Now just mind you, they're coming with dog sleds. That's how crazy they are about this raw whale meat. And I didn't feel so sorry for the wolves that I've killed up there, and the wolves that I've helped kill when I saw this little Eskimo lad standing there real warm and comfortable in his wolf hide parkie. Baleen is also characteristic of the blue whale, and years ago this was of high commercial value and worth over $10 a pound. At that time it was used as stays in ladies' wearing apparel. But with the introduction of plastics, it has produced its present value to just about nothing. The baleen is what I call the gills of a whale. This one had over 2,000 pounds of baleen between its jaws. The baleen itself is about ½ inch thick and 10-11 inches wide and 10 to 12 feet long. You see, the blue whale swims leisurely along with his mouth gaping wide open, and he forces the seawater out through those slat-like fibers, and that traps the plankton and small fishes inside that he swallows unchewed with one big gulp. Nowadays, the kids dry it and make sleds and toboggans out of it. And with the butchering of the whale over, the older men will always walk away with their hands folded behind their back as a sign of content and a job well done. And in the words of the Eskimo, we are now looking at today's sun setting tomorrow, because ever so many times we were hunting well past the international date line. So that night, I talked it over with my host, Solomon Boshu, and his wife, Myrtle, in their lovely little home alongside the buzzing gasoline lantern. And we talked of our original intent of my expedition up there, the walrus hunt. And we talked also of the dangers involved in the hunting of the walrus, regardless of the methods used. And they both hoped that my new method would help their people. And their people were gathered in one of the local nearby buildings and were celebrating the good fortune of the whale kill by singing and beating on their walrus hide drums. They make these drums by taking the skin from a stomach of a walrus and stretching it around a wooden hoop. And they put little beads of water on its surface so that if they get carried away with a little too much with their work, that they won't bat a hole through them. But this celebration lasted far into the evening, and I hit the sack a little early that evening. And as I stretched out in my bunk up in the attic, I could hear the throbbing of these drums in the background. And before I fell asleep, I naturally thought of the many hunts that I've been on, and also the many shots that I've had. But I will confess right here now, folks, that most of the shots I've had on hunting trips were Canadian club. But the next day dawned bright and clear, and this is a perfect day for walrus hunting. The dogs are up at the crack of dawn. They want to go on a walrus hunt because they know they're going to be well fed. Now, like their masters, they're also great pullers, and they make each dog really work for their keep. Now there's a variation in the colors of the sled dog, and the reason for that is just before I hunted with them, they lost most all of their dogs. they didn't have enough to feed them, so they starved to death. So the government sent up some German Shepherds, and the crossbreeding has produced that particular color phase on these dogs. That big hook that he just pulled up was a brake hook. They'll also use that hook to get a dog's attention every once in a while. If it doesn't pull, they'll walk up and bust him right alongside the head with it. Now, this was a funny deal, our first day walrus hunting. The shoreline, which had a few days before been only a block away from the village of Gamble, now had moved 3 miles out to sea. The wind had shifted during the nights and brought in the ice, so we had to lug all of these boats and gear over this rough ice 3 miles to reach this open water. And there's a solid ivory keel on the bottom of that boat that slides along just like a giant skate. These guys sure got things figured out there. A solid ivory keel. And as I mentioned before, they'll always mount the motor in a well near the center of the boat. Now, the same crew will be out after the walrus as they were after the whale, and that'll be around 150 men. Now, this has its dangers too, because if they happen to strike any submerged chunk of solid ice and hit it square, they could therefore rip the mounting and right through the bottom of the boat. But surprisingly, this setup will drive these boats, I'd say maybe 20, 25 miles an hour. And we'll be doing most of our hunting in fairly close to the shore and not over 200 feet depth of water. And again, I'm going to repeat myself, that's Russia that you see right there. Now as we scoot along there, they said this is what they call pancake ice. But I heard them say other phrases such as old ice, new ice, young ice, field ice, pack ice, so forth. That's pancake ice. But one can almost, see right through the bottom of the boat at all times. You have to have something that's tough and flexible. Even a glass hull would break itself up. It's got to be, see that's exactly the way they're made. This is Gamble Burial Mountain. And yet today, folks, after death, the women and children are placed on top of the ground at the foot of the mountain. Young and mediocre hunters are carried quarter way up. Chiefs and mighty hunters are placed on the very top of the mountain in their favorite dog sled, and then the Eskimo will walk away, never to return to the grave. And always this rocking action will be used to reach open water. And we'll skirt hundreds and hundreds of these little icebergs. 9/10 of that ice we all know is underneath the water. Now, it takes a trained eye to see a walrus blow, because he'll only spout water about 5 feet high. But these men have trained themselves to pick up the sign of a walrus's blow at distances up to 1,000 yards with the naked eye. Some of the more fortunate ones do have a cheap pair of binoculars. But every patch of open water that we came to, we flushed up thousands and thousands of merbirds and eider ducks. Truly a shotgun hunter's paradise. But as yet, I still didn't have a single shot with the Kimos in my boat, so you might want to say that I wanted to impress them with my shooting ability. And one of those little merbirds swam by about 20, 25 yards away, and I pegged a regular target arrow at him. Naturally, I drove it right through him, so only the feathers on the shaft remained there. Now, the merbird looked somewhat like the fish duck, or the merganser, of the Wisconsin ducks around here. They have the same type of pointed bill. Now, here's where I thought, fellas, that I was going to get my first shot at a walrus. And this is what I mean when I say the walruses are excited. I mean, the Eskimos are excitable at times. When we were still 100 yards away from them, I was just starting to reach for the bow, and right now you're going to see Eric gun barrel fly up there, and that's when he plugged that walrus right there, right in the middle of the throat. It didn't hit him dead center. It was off to the right a little bit, so we knew it would resurface, and I got right in between the both of them, and I was going to try to beat him to this next shot. See the tip of my bow there? But I never saw the bow hunter yet who can shoot faster than a rifleman. And when you see the water fly, that's when both bullets from these two rifles hits this big bull right through the belly, right there. Now, right now, folks, he's a goner. It might take a big bull walrus 4 or 5 days to cash in his chips, but once you puncture the intestines of any animal, regardless of its size, it will slowly die from peritonitis. But the Eskimo feels that he's doing no harm. He just can't figure it out that way. But now this is how they do it. This is how walrus hunting is practiced by the Eskimo right today. Now, I'm going to point out some of these bullet splashes later on, especially for the benefit of the ladies, because I want them to recognize the ones that are coming up in the forthcoming scenes. Now, my first shot here, I was using a 77-pound bow, and I made a shot at about 30 yards, and you will see the arrow just bounced right off. And then the Eskimo turned to me and says, "Why, didn't you know?" They said the neck and skin on the neck and shoulders of a walrus is 3 inches thick. I said, "No, I didn't know." So using the same bow, I tried a closer shot, and this time that arrow only penetrated about 3 inches, and that harpoon broadhead pulled free after he had swam not more than 15 feet. So then I immediately switched to my old green-bellied 105-pound bow, and while I was making that switch, all of this action was going around me at the same time. Now, there was a direct hit, ladies. Did you see that one? I'm going to point out another one. Here's one coming up real soon here, right there. You look carefully, you'll see the blood starting to flow out in back of them. Now, you keep your eyes open. It takes a lot of bullets to bring these things down. Now, how many walruses were hit and got away, or how many were not hit, you folks will have to guess along with me. But I do know this, and I talked to every one of the hunters, and there was about 150 of them, and I talked to all of them, and each of them had fired at least 2 boxes of shells, so we got to say that more than 5,000 rounds of ammunition were fired on this one day, and all we had to show for our efforts on this day was this one lone bull walrus right here. Now, seconds count, folks, because the minute he dies, he's going to sink like a rock, and we're going to lose him. Now, he'll swing around, and again, the boat will come in on him about 20 miles an hour, and they threw that harpoon at him, and it just bounced right off of him. Now, again, they'll spin that boat around, come in on him again wide open, and again, they'll fire that razor-sharp harpoon. And again, it just bounces right back off that tough skin. Now, here, folks, is what I call Guts Unlimited. Now watch this. Are you standing at the prow of this boat? Young Eric Beauchou, 20 years old, Eskimo man, coming in here wide open, make a perfect thrust, right in the soft spot of the throat. You notice the tusk or ivory missed the back end of that boat by not more than a foot. Now that's getting pretty close to a walrus, folks. In fact, that's how they lost their school teacher when I was hunting with them, along with 3 other hunters. The walrus slammed the tusk through the side of the boat and spilled them all into the ocean. And before any of us could get to them, all 3 of them were at the bottom of the sea. Now, they're still a little leery yet of this walrus, even if he has been hit somewhere, I would say, within the vicinity of 50 to 75 times. So when he turns around and swings, I'm going to point out this next bullet patch. There it was, right there. I want the ladies to recognize the ones that are coming up. They'll just keep shooting and shooting until they get the job done. If you ever go up there on a walrus hunt, fellas, bring at least 3 cases of ammunition along. You go through it in short order. And this old man here, oh, golly, I could listen for him talk for days on end. He killed thousands of heads of animals. And I don't know if it were those dark glasses he was wearing or whether he just didn't give a damn. But he steered that boat head first, wide open, into 3 icebergs in one afternoon. Yep. Over the walkie-talkies, they said, "Come on over here, we got a pot of them." So we went over there and cranked up the old motor, got over there just in time to get in on what they call a pod of walruses. About 15 or 20 in that pod. Just a couple here, 3. Notice the ivory went right down into the ice, sunk in the ice. Now picture this in your mind's eyes, folks. Here come 150 Eskimos closing in on 150 walruses. Now you're going to recognize when the firing begins because these babies will suddenly come to life. And when I mean cut loose, I mean cut loose with anything they get their hands on. Shotguns, 22s, buckshots, 1-ounce slugs, army ammunition, you name it, they've got it. Right now she starts a ratty-tat-tat, bangity-bang, bang-bang, and they're all shooting and hoping and praying to God that they'll hit one in the center of the nose, explode his brain, and put him down on the ice. But every single one of them, some of them leaving blood trails behind, get away. Not one of them stayed up on the ice. Here they, 150,000 pounds of walruses. Fire right into those, they all left that ice. That iceberg popped right back into view. There's that one I'd hit previously there. See that one? John Burns, the state game manager up there, made me a small wager that I couldn't take a walrus with my bow and arrow. Now, with a hunting arrow, I hit him right in the dead center in the nose. I had 10, 11 inches of penetration, and I paralyzed him. As we sped by, I drove another one into the lungs there, right ahead of the flipper, and with that, he keeled over on his side, and by that time, we were right on by him. Boy, I felt good about making that shot, fellas. Old Lady Luck was riding both shoulders, that's for sure. Now, the only thing we had to do was to just watch this here. Now, the baby walruses will ride on their mother's back just like a baby loon or duck would ride on their mother's back. And the females are the ones that are protective to their youngs. They are the ones that charge the boat in most cases. And now watch this one here. That's the one I'd hit in the back of the head there, and I'm just like the rest of the fellas. I don't like to lose an animal once I've hit him. And I must have had at least 30 inches of penetration on this next shot because it's gonna be coming up fast right now, but right there, see there? Now, when he comes up and swings, we swing with him, and you see only about 6 or 8 inches of that solid glass shot sticking out and with the line attached. Now, fellas, there it is right there. Now, this has tickled me ever so much that I had gone up there and did this, because this is what I had gone up there to do. And this is what I tried to impress upon the Eskimo while I was hunting with them, that they should do their shooting with a bow and arrow at a safer distance. After all, I made that shot at 25 yards, and it was a lot safer for me doing that than slamming a harpoon into the half-dead walrus over the side of the boat. And this is what I tried to impress upon them, that they should do their shooting with a bow and arrow, and then first concentrate on hitting one animal, and then following that poke along, or buoy, and finish one animal off at a time. And what we found out was this, that it didn't take a 1,000-pound test line to raise the dead weight of a walrus to the surface, because we easily did the job with a 200-pound test line. They're a little hard to start at first, but if you apply good, slow, steady pressure and play them like you would a big muskie, then once you get them started to move, they come up with no problem. So the only thing we had to do was to go over to and find a flat piece of ice so that we could bring up the walrus up on top of it and butcher it up. And I wanted to see how these guys would go about handling something like this, especially on these 3,000-pound animal, because I remember the days I lived on a farm. My dad and I thought it was quite a chore to butcher up 3, 4 small hogs in an afternoon. Now, the first thing they will do is chisel out in the ice what they call a dead man, which is nothing more than an anchor point to hold fast at one end of block and tackle. But this will also give you an idea how strong that walrus hide is. They'll cut a little slit between the sides, maybe an inch deep and an inch wide. And it's still strong enough so that when they put the hook of that other block through there, and then with everybody pulling on the other end of the rope, it's still strong that it does not tear free. If it tore free, that walrus would just slide back into the water and drop right out of sight. And to the sight of blood, the Eskimo will pay no more attention to than as if he just kicked over a gallon jug of water. Some of them will lean right down and drink it as it comes from the side of the critter. I was also to learn that the whiskers on a walrus's nose are stiff like porcupine quills, and that they could kill a 200-pound seal by just pressing those whiskers down on top of it. Now, they butchered up this walrus in about 45 minutes' time. One guy at all times just stood by sharpening the knives. And the walruses who live on St. Lawrence Island are considered by authorities to be the most primitive people left on the North American continent today. And they need 150 walruses to bring themselves through the season. And while I was hunting with these people, they got 136 walruses. That was our total catch. So they were pretty tickled about that. They butchered up this walrus, possibly mentioned this before, about 45 minutes time. Now this little guy here, folks, is not hurt, but he's actually smeared blood on his neck there and the back of his head by pressing up against some of the wound in his mother's body, who is laying dead right alongside him. Now he might not look it, but he's only a year and a half old, and but he still will weigh right now over 1,500 pounds. But he'll stay with his mother for a full 2 years before she boots him out on his own. The other one, probably his sister or brother, they stick his head out of the water there, and he'd bark at me and sounded just like a regular little alley dog. Terrific swimmers. They can dive to the depths of 200 feet for their search for their clams. And with their cup-shaped mouth, they shuck the clam before they swallow the clam itself unchewed. Now, all you big game hunters know that if you cannot remove the entrails from any animal that you kill, then the gases that escape through the sidewalls will make this not an edible condition. Now this little guy here, it's sort of sad to look at it. I took a meat hook here, or meat pole, and I touched him on the chin whiskers, and when I'd tap him on the whiskers, he'd strike back, and I could feel and sense the tremendous amount of power that he could exert with those powerful neck muscles of his. In fact, he would jar the 2,500-pound dead weight of some other beneath him. And then I readily believed the older Eskimos when they told me that whenever a polar bear collided with a walrus, that the polar bear came out second best. They said a big bull walrus could drive 40-inch long tusks, or ivory, completely out of sight into the side of a polar bear. However, an adult polar bear can take one of these little guys. He doesn't have enough armor to protect himself with. Right about this time, young Eric Beauchou come running over there carrying a 16-pound sledgehammer. He said, "Step aside, Art, step aside, old man." He said, "I'll show you how to flatten that thing with one blow." I said, "Eric, old boy, what do you want to kill him for?" I said, "We haven't got room now in the boats to haul any more meat back." He said, "Art, I'll kill anything that's got hide, fur, feathers, or scales on." He said, "I want you to remember that." I said, "Okay, old buddy." Finally, I was able to push him back into the water, and I wished him well on his way. Then the first thing I saw them do is to remove that big heart. Now, the heart of a walrus is real large. I would estimate it'd go at least 25 or 30 pounds. And then they take the lungs after. Now, this is the prized tidbits of it. Now, when you hunt with these great hunters or primitive people, be prepared to get a little jolt every once in a while, because I sure did. I nearly flipped over backwards, because the next thing I saw them do was to remove and braid those small intestines. And after those are braided, they stored those up in the front of their big canoe so they didn't kick them around too much. And when they get those back to their homes, they'll eat the contents of those with a spoon. However, they don't take the large intestines. I suppose they feel that that's getting a little too far back.
They braid those, and they put those up in front of their big canoe so that if they happen to be jumping around too much,
that's also a part of a bull walrus. You guys know what that is. Now this is the stomach. This is what they make their drums out of, folks. But each stomach will hold at least 3 bushel of these undigested clams. And these great hunters will reach right in there and jerk them out and eat them before they cool off. Some of them will rinse them in salt water. That's young Eric Beauchou. He rinsed his off a little bit, maybe for added salt on it. Who knows? They eat those direct from the stomach, just like the kids around here eat popcorn. Down she goes. He said, "Here, Art," he said, "have one." I said, "Eric, old boy," I said, "believe me," I said, "I know I could get her down, but I don't think I could hold her there." The most primitive people left on the North American continent today, folks, but believe me, I just can't say enough good about them. They are the friendliest or toughest people, or were the friendliest and toughest people that I have ever hunted with. And there's no superstition amongst the Eskimo that half of what he takes from the sea, he shall return to the sea. And as he believes in this so strongly, you will see I even helped him do the job, push half of it back to the open water. And I believe he would do this if he was starving to death along with his dogs. Back she goes. But to each his own, they say. When you're in Rome, do like the Romans do. Now this meat is very blackish in appearance and bouncing around like that. 12 hours later, even before we were halfway back to the village of Gamble, it was still bouncing around like that. I was a little afraid to put that in a frying pan until it settled down somewhat. And their meat handling methods are not the daintiest, that's for sure, folks. Any old way she lands, it's okay by them, but they always make certain to put in these hook holes first before they throw it into their stink pits. The stink pit is a 10-foot square hole that they store this in, that's dug in the permafrost, and it keeps this meat edible for periods up to 10 months. But I saw the guys that smoked cigarettes, they'd kick their butts right out on top of it. I noticed the guys who chewed tobacco, that their aim wasn't the best either. They'll just throw it into the boat any old way she lands. It's good enough for them. A set of ivory like that is worth about, or at that time I should say, $35 to the Eskimo. And in order for me to remove that set from the island, I had to have carving or etching done on it so that the cost of the work equaled the cost of the raw ivory. Otherwise, you are forbidden to remove it from the island. So I spent a most memorable 3.5 months with my old senator friend there. And folks, I went up to Alaska to help the Eskimo, and I sincerely believe that I did, because many of them are now using the bow and arrow on their hunts and are having a lot of success with it. However, most of these men have now gone to the short, powerful crossbow, and I know that that's going to make it ever so much safer for these good, wonderful, tough, and kind people who I can't say enough good about. So until you go up there and experience life like this yourself, you'll just have to take my word for it. This is no land for the timid. And as Service said, there's a land where the mountains are nameless, and the rivers all run, God knows where. There are lives that are erring and aimless, and death that just hangs by a hair. There are hardships that nobody reckons. There are valleys unpeopled and still. There's the land. Oh, it beckons and beckons, and I want to go back, and I will. And that's it, folks. Thank you, and good night all.